Hey folks, welcome back to the Rupedia world, and I am Abhinay Gupta. And today again we will be continuing with the interpretation of statute, deeds and documents. Right? So we have already gone through the three primary rules. I hope you enjoyed it, right? And I hope you understand it. Right? And I hope that the topic is approaching to be a easier topic now. Right? Now you are not scared of this topic. Although the typical words are yet to come, but I assure you that the topic is not difficult at all. Right? But you will be enlightened a lot more than what you have been enlightened reading the entire company's law or the entire allied law. Right? Because whenever you talk to somebody out of your field, right, at any point of time, if you're talking about something, if you're holding a discussion on any act, then the knowledge of this chapter is the only knowledge that will help you with the entire discussion on that topic. When you know what the words are, what is preamble, what is preface, what are the header notes, what are the footnotes, what are the rules and everything, right? You try and understand, over there you will be able to talk. But if you just know these acts, right, and you're talking with somebody from a different field who have no interest in these acts, you'll not be able to talk about anything. You do not know the basics of what an act is made up of what the text, the document, the deeds are made up of. Right? Just mugging up the act will not fetch you anywhere, will not lead you anywhere. What you need is the basics. Right? Because if you do not know these things, how do you prepare an act, man? You do not prepare an act well. Just knowing the provisions and just listening to what a teacher says and trying and interpreting it will not help. You need to do it yourself after you become a professional. Right? There's nobody who will come and help you out with that. And if you don't know the basics, if somebody asks you, please read out the preface and let me know what the act says. And what is the preface, man? Like a Greek word they're talking about, huh? The preface. They ask you to write a deed, a document, and then you write in a title. They say, hey, the title has to mean this. Is it? What is the purpose of the title? It has to be a little fancy thing. No. Forget about the essays, the comprehension that you were writing in your schools, right? The titles and everything, they have a definition. They have to be written, they have to be interpreted in a particular way. And we never knew it. And our students in CA final, very minimum students, they have an interest in this chapter. When they know that, this is one chapter that is enlightening them. The others are something that will keep on changing. The Acts, Companies Act 1956, chartered accountants who have qualified 2 years back, like up to 14-15, they have all followed Companies Act 1956, and now they have to study Companies Act 2013. So it's a waste for them. I won't call it exactly a waste, but it's actually not fulfilling their purpose. They have to go beyond. But this is something that will remain constant. This is something that is pervasive, that is omnipresent with all the acts, all the statute. I don't see a point of not studying this chapter. Right? So forget about just your exams. You have a hell lot of life ahead of that. Your exams that will be over in a year. What next? Develop yourself. Grow yourself. Right? Don't work so hard for something that will lose its value. Right? Keep that attitude in mind. So, we have already done three. Let's be done with that, right? It is not a moral lecture over here that we are having. We have to study the act. So, we have already done with 3 rules of interpretation. Right, in the previous rule, that is the harmonious construction, we have also been through few questions that have been asked in the examination, and my dear friend, that is one of the most important rules that have been asked over and over again. Right, that is why I shared few questions with you, and I hope that made your entire topic very clear. Right, today we'll move ahead with the new rule, that is the rule of beneficial construction. Right, again this is conceptually a strong rule. Right? You have to be conceptual, you have to think beyond. Okay, why was it so? You have to think from the point of view of the legislature, from the point of view of the parliament. So why did they take this action? Why did they bring this up? What was the reason behind? Right? And then you interpret it accordingly. Right? It is an interesting topic, I'll say. So please stay tuned throughout the class. Right? You'll love it, you'll learn it. And if I tell them we did not have any specific case study based questions in the past examinations, right? But you have had direct questions from this rule. Like explain the principle of the rule of beneficial interpretation. right? Or explain the rule of beneficial interpretation while interpreting the statute, and quote an example. That is an add-on. That is a straight kind of questions that have been asked 3-4 times already in your past examinations, right? But that does not mean you will not be asked case study based questions on this. But generally case study based questions will be rare on this topic. Why? Because this does not just refer to what is given in the statute. It also goes to the background. Why did that act, or why did that provision, or why did that section come up? What had happened, the history, right? So you will not get a case study where they give you all the history and then they give you the present case and then they say please interpret accordingly. So least chance for that, right? But yeah, a direct question on explain the rules of beneficial construction is one question that can be asked again in your examination. So be thorough with it. Okay? So finally we start the rules of beneficial construction, right? Stay with me, it's not a big rule, but yeah, there's something you need to know over here. So as we start any rule, first we do is the applicability. We understand the applicability of the rule, right? So this rule will be called, this rule will help you out, this rule will be seeked out for reference when the words are ambiguous, when the literal interpretation fails, or where an extended meaning is needed. When you do not know what is it, right? You need an extended meaning. For that you have to go to the background, right? So these are 3 cases where this rule of beneficial construction will be applicable for you. Clear? Now I'll get to all these 3 in detail now. And one more thing, over here when we are studying the rule of beneficial construction, we will talk about something which is called the Heydon's rule, right? It is Heydons, Heydon's rule, right? So don't be thinking about it, what is Heydon, yeah, who is Heydon, yeah, we'll come to that. But first we need to understand the applicability. So the first thing we said is the words are ambiguous. Now what do you mean by words are ambiguous? We have already discussed it in the previous classes, but I'm just trying to repeat it so that you are along with me in the entire class, right? So when we talk about the word being ambiguous, means that the word is capable of being interpreted in more than one sense, right? The word does not have a specific meaning in this situation. It does not interpret just one thing. It does not straightforward say that yes, this is it. No, it generalizes the concept a little bit, and you can derive 2 or 3 meaning out of the same set of words. That is when we say it is ambiguous and it is not specific, right? It becomes difficult in such situation to understand things, right? That is when the rule of beneficial construction or the Heydon's rule come into play. So don't be surprised if in the exam they ask you to explain the Heydon's rule, right? This is the Heydon's rule. Yes, now you hit the jackpot, right? You are enlightened. Now this is the Heydon's rule. Now, if there are some students who just leave the question because they'll say, oh, this is the 10th rule, we did not study. No, it's not like that, right? The rule of beneficial construction is also known as the Heydon's rule, right? So the next point is literal interpretation fails. Exactly. Because if that qualified, you would never come to the other rules. The rule of literal interpretation, the first rule we studied, if that qualifies the purpose, you do not need to go ahead. And when will it qualify? When the words are not ambiguous, when things are clear, when the grammatical meaning gives the entire sense, right? Remember the rule of literal interpretation we discussed? Now when do we say that the rule of literal interpretation may fail? It is when, if we give the words the literal meaning of what it has as per the dictionary, the entire object of the section gets defeated, right? The object of legislature, right? The purpose of forming a statute gets defeated. Why? Because they formed it with a specific thing in mind, right? Maybe to advance a remedy or to suppress a mischief. Yes, these are 2 set of words that you will have to remember, and make sure that if you are asked a question in the rule of beneficial construction, you use these 2 statements. One is to suppress the mischief, and second, advance the remedy, right? I'll give you an example, right, that I heard somewhere, I read somewhere, but that is actually one thing that was also a main cause behind this rule, the Heydon's rule, right? Oh, sorry, I read it exactly over here with this rule, right, in your books, in your institute material. So I'll take the same example that was the main reason behind this enactment of the Heydon's rule, right? I'll get back to that. First we understand that, okay, if the object is defeated, then we do not apply the rule of literal interpretation, And when we do not apply that and we move ahead and we see that there was something in the background that has to give weightage, there has to be given some weight, we have to interpret it according to that background. Why? Because the particular statute was enacted to support or to overcome the thing that was there in the background. So unless and until you know the background, how do you know what you need to suppress or what do you need to advance? So once for that you need to know the background, and once you know the background, you know how to interpret it. What interpretation would suppress the mischief and what interpretation would advance the remedy, right? You should not go to the other way, advancing the mischief and suppressing the remedy, right? Interpretation can also be that way, and that is what people do, and that is the reason why the legislature had to come up with such an interpretation, with such a modification, right? Whenever a law is made, right, there are many people who try to just go through it. Oh, the law is made, let me see the loopholes, and then they hit on the loophole, bang on, and they say, yes, I have achieved it. And then the legislature comes up with another rule. Or then is the case when the court will have to apply the beneficial construction. Okay, man, you're trying to find the loophole and get into it, I'll pull you out of it. Why? Because our interpretation says that you are still wrong. And the other person like, interpretation? Listen, I just read the text, right? It says this. But sorry, boss. When the text defeats the object of the law, we do not apply the text. We apply the rule of beneficial construction. And now you are trapped. Now you are stuck in that hole where you're trying to get in. Right? You try to get into the loophole. Now you're stuck over there. You're behind the bars now. That powerful is this thing. Right? And that is because the court, the legislature, all of them want that if we have enacted a statute, right, it should have a purposeful construction. Right? The objective for which it was constructed should have been met. So you can, if the literal interpretation does not help it out, use the rule of beneficial construction, take the charge in your hand, the court, and please go ahead with it. Please advance the remedy and try to suppress the mischief. And this person, right, the person who tried to get into the loophole of the law was trying to advance the mischief, and we have to suppress him. Right? And since this rule is a Heydon's rule and referring to the background that led to the origination of the entire rule, right? So that is why we'll always see that there is an extended meaning is needed. Why? To help the public in general. You'll understand this when we go to the Heydon's rule, right? We go to the background. I'll tell you the story. I'll narrate the entire story, right? So extended meaning is needed when you need to enhance or you need to advance a remedy to support the public, right, in general. So let us begin with the story, right? I'll only narrate the important aspect, right? You don't need to know the specific names, right? You just need to know the concept behind. Why did this rule come up, right? Consider it to be an example, right? You can also consider it to be an hypothetical example, but it is not, right? But since I will not specify the names of the places, I'll just give you a brief story like the students in the younger classes, right? They are told with a hypothetical name, right? So consider it that way. So what happens is, once upon a time, not very long ago, on the streets of US, right? You remember the story started this way in your younger classes? Once upon a time, not very long ago, on the streets of US, right? The people faced some difficulty. There was a monster that disturbed the people on the street, right? Now, the monster over here is basically the prostitutes over there. If I go to the real life, then they were prostitutes, but in the story we'll call them monsters, right? So there were dangerous monsters on the streets of US who disturbed the people when they passed by. The children, the young people, the old age, right? Whenever they used to pass the streets in US, right, they were always scared. Why? Because there was this monster on the street. And this monster was really dangerous. They used to approach each and every person who used to pass by, right? So the parents, they could not leave their children alone. The young guys, young girls, they were always at threat, right? The entire situation in that colony, on that street, right, that was tensed. People stopped moving out of their house. They tried looking out for remedy. They were always chased by this monster, right? So what did they do is they went on to complain. They went to the hero of the street, right? That is the police over there. and they complained that, okay, we have a monster over there. Please save us from the monster. That monster is very dangerous, disturbing all of us on the streets. Right? So over there what happened is that the court or the legislature over there, they passed a rule. And in the rule they said that this monster is not allowed to walk on the streets. By walking on the street means you can walk when people are not there. You cannot threaten people on the streets. Right? Let the children, let the young people, let the old age, let everybody who is on the street work peacefully. Right? Please do not threaten them. This monster, right? It was a very cunning monster, the wolf, right? The kind of a wolf. What they did is they hired places, right? The way or where they stayed, right? They rented apartments and everything. They stood on their doorsteps, they stood in the balcony, and from there they started threatening people. Right? Again, there was a tense situation. This monster coming from anywhere, from any side, just yelling out, "Hey, I'm here!" And the people got scared. Right? And again, when the case was taken up to the police and to the court, then they said, now they were trying to get into the loophole of the law. They said, "We are not on the streets. Please mind your business. You told us to be away from the streets. We are away from the streets. We are into our balcony and we are into our houses. So that is none of your business. Now you cannot say anything on that. Please, I have read the statute." And literally, when the court went ahead to read the statute, the court found out by literal interpretation that yes, they were right. The act that was passed, or the rule that was passed, it says that they were not supposed to disturb people on the streets. And they were not on the streets, they were in their balcony and places. Right? And the street was defined, or the meaning was contained in the Street Offense Act that was applicable in US, and that only talked about the streets. So what did they do is they said, we have actually passed a rule which says you are not supposed to disturb the people on the streets. Right? That does not necessarily mean that you have to be on the street to disturb them. It means that they should not be disturbed anyways when they are walking on that street. So you cannot also disturb them from your balcony or your doorstep. Why? Because they are on the streets and you are disturbing them on the streets. And the pavement and the doorsteps, they were all part of the streets. That is what the court says. Right? Because the court was applying the rule of beneficial construction. Right? Let's come out of the story. What actually happened is, if you go by the literal interpretation in that situation, right, what do you conclude? That okay, you're not allowed to be on the streets, and they were not on the streets, so you cannot punish them accordingly. Right? But if you go on with the beneficial construction, what did I say? 2 statements. Who remembers it? Just 10 minutes back I narrated 2 statements and I told you have to use it into the answer. Let me see, who remembers it? Yes, it was to suppress the mischief and to advance the remedy. So what was the mischief? The mischief was that these monsters were disturbing the people on the street. Right? So that was the mischief that was to be suppressed. And what was the remedy to be advanced? That they were to be taken off from the street. They were to be kept away from the streets. Right? So the court interpreted that in order to safeguard the interest of those people, the normal citizen of US, right, and to keep you away from the street, I would interpret it, that means the court would interpret it in a beneficial way, that the streets would include the pavements, the doorsteps and everything, and you cannot disturb the people on the street. Why? Because they found out the essence of that statute, that yes, the statute was enacted for this specific purpose. The people were to be saved. The court says, I will save the people. Now you are behind bars. You will be penalized, you will be charged. And from next day onwards, please stay inside your houses. Right? We don't want you monsters to come out on the streets and disturb the people over there. Right? So now you understand why those 2 statements were very important, and why is that the only essence of the entire rule? That you have to suppress the mischief. That was the mischief. They tried to interpret the law in a literal way, and they said that the law talks about a restriction on this specific portion and we are beyond, so the law does not apply on us. That was the mischief, but you have to suppress it. And what is the remedy? You have to keep them away and you have to enhance it. So the court says, please stay away. I would include this into the interpretation and you are found guilty. Right? That is the Heydon's rule. Right? And the case was between Smith and Hughes. Okay? So now are you clear with it? Did that story help? I guess it did. Right? You don't always have to write that example into the examination, right? But if the question says explain it with an example, try to quote the same example. And yeah, don't be kiddish, don't use the word monster over there. Be polite and use the word prostitute, right? Because that was the fact behind the case. They were prostitutes who were disturbing the people over there. Right? Also mention the Street Offence Act, right? That defined the streets over there. I'm talking about 2-3 specific things that you have to include in your answer. Streets, its meaning, Heydon's rule that is applicable, suppress the mischief, advance the remedy. These 4 content has to be there in your answer. Rest you write the story in your own words and you get the marks. Right? Underline these words that I'm talking about. If you get a question, underline these, highlight it. The examiner should know that yes, you have used them. Right? So we know the applicability, we know the story behind. Now we move ahead with the key features. So the key feature is exactly what I have already told you, that you have to suppress the mischief, you have to advance the remedy, and you have to consider the background. Right? And how do you consider the background of the statute? What do you see when you consider the background of the statute? So the court basically has to see the historical background. What was the story behind? Why was this statute enacted? What was the target that it was trying to achieve? Right? And what was the common law before that statute was applicable and that did not fulfill the task? And just for the remedy of that, this particular statute was enacted. The court has to know that. Right? So for that, what will the court check? The court will check what was exactly the law before making the statute. Right? The law which actually failed to fulfill its purpose, and that is why the statute was enacted. So what was that law? Right? Then what was the mischief? Right? Or what was the defect which the law could not avoid? Right? And then what is the remedy that they want? Now if I'm trying to bring out something new, okay, that law failed, that's a separate story. Now you need something else, now you need a new statute. What do you want from that statute? What remedy should it provide? Right? Know that remedy, and then what is the reason for that remedy? Why do you need that remedy? Understand that, and then you have to interpret it. Okay, so this was the mischief, this is the remedy sought. The previous act did not fulfill the task, and this statute was actually made to have an effect, so I will interpret it in a way to give an effect. Right? And that is how you move ahead. And then your basic target obviously is to suppress the mischief and to advance the remedy. Whatever the remedy you wanted out of it, you have to work towards advancing it. You have to support the remedy. And if there is a mischief, if somebody is trying to get into the loophole, please block them into that hole itself. Right? We don't want them to be out. So if there are some people who are trying to get into that mischief, right, then you have to suppress it. You don't have to allow them to be successful with that mischief. Right? That is the rule of beneficial construction. But that is not all. We still have 2 points to go. That is Heydon's rule and the non-applicability. Right? When we talk about the Heydon's rule, the interpretation of the definition, where action is required, inaction means default, and personal performance is not required. Oh, so these are some big words, and I know it's a bouncer. Right? Let me help you out with it. So let us remove this non-applicability from the screen, and we will just focus on the Heydon's rule. Okay, we saw the story, right, what gave rise to the Heydon's rule. Now what is the rule that we need to understand? And the first thing we have is the interpretation of the definition. So how do you basically interpret the definition? So whatever definition is given, you have to interpret it in the context or in the light of the scheme. Right? Why was the definition created? What was the object behind creating the definition? So consider that object and then try and interpret the definition. Right? If you have a definition, like the definition of the street over there in the example, remember? So they include all the pavement, all the doorsteps and everything into the part of the street, and they said you have to be away from that also. Right? Don't be in the balcony because that is in the reachability of the street. So even that was avoided. Right? So they had to extend the definition for interpretation. Right? Next is, if action is required, inaction means default. And if the court says that something has to be done, that means it has to be done. Right? You just remain silent and you do not do it, then you will be considered to be a default. Right? For example, if the act says that you will have to leave that street, right? Please shift somewhere else. You did not shift. That is the default. Although you're not coming out, you're not disturbing them anymore, but you did not also shift. So that is the default. The code did not order them something like that, but I'm just taking a hypothetical example, right, to help you understand the context. That where an action is required and you do not perform it, that inaction will be considered to be a default. Right? Last is personal performance is not required. Now understand, if the quote at any point of time or if the act at any point of time says that this thing is to be done, and when it says that it has to be done, that means it has to be done no matter who does it. All they want is that the law should be provided for. Right? If they want a wall to be built across the street, then it has to be built. I don't care who builds it, unless and until the law specifically specifies that Mr. X has to build it, or the people in charge, or the authority, or the secretary of the society will have to build it. Unless and until the law says something like that, the law specifies the person behind the performance. Right? If it specifies the person behind the performance, then the person has to perform it. Otherwise, anybody can perform it. Once it is performed, the law is abided by. Right? There is no more issue with that. Now, the last thing you have is the non-applicability, where literal interpretation is applicable. Okay, over here you do not have to consider any other aspect. There is just one line, the one statement, one law, one statute that you have to identify, that you have to interpret. So if the literal interpretation gives you your desired objective, if everything is met, the law was framed so beautifully that even when you interpret it in the literal sense, it gives out the effect, right? Everything is done perfectly well. Then you do not need to apply this rule. But if the literal interpretation fails, then you have to go beyond, advance the remedy, suppress the mischief, look at the background, understand the essence of the statute, and then interpret it accordingly. Right? And the last one you have is the fiscal statute. So remember specifically that if you have been given a case study on any fiscal statute, right, and then you are asked to apply the beneficial construction, do not apply it. Why? Because it says that normally this do not apply on fiscal statutes unless and until there is specifically something needed, right? Like fiscal statute means fiscal law, right? You have also studied it in your audit. You have a chapter, right? So understand that is tax audit, right, over there. So if something is related to your income tax act, your central excise act, your custom act, right, all these kinds of act, or your service tax, PF, anything that is related to the fiscal, right, the where money is involved, over there you will not go behind and interpret it in the beneficial way, right, because the words given in those statutes are very plain, right. Now for example they say that below 2 lakh, income below 2 lakh will be exempt, right, then don't go what is the intention of exempting them, and if somebody is not fulfilling that intention, or if there is some other rule, then please interpret it in the beneficial way and do not exempt them. No, we will not do like that. If they say below 5 lakh it's just 10%, or below 5 lakh it's exempt, that means it's exempt. No other rule, no interpretation. Now you go beyond and say, hey, why did they exempt it? Okay, this is the scene. They do not want any hardship on the poor people. This man is filthy rich, but yeah, this year he did not earn, but he has a lot of wealth, right? So let us do one thing, let us tax him. Beneficial construction. No, you cannot do that. Right? That is why it says that the beneficial construction will not be applicable on the fiscal law. Because the fiscal law is always drafted because of some background, right? Because there was some mischief, because you want some remedy out of it. So if you go beneath that, then everything will have a case. Everywhere the people will come up with a case. Either the income tax authority will charge a case upon somebody, or that somebody will charge a case upon the income tax authority. That is why they say, please do not interfere with this rule in the fiscal law, unless and until there is something very specific and something that calls for this law, and that will be the judgment of the court. You do not need to interfere over there. Right? Whew. So that was all about the rule of beneficial construction. I hope that was clear with you. I hope you understand the story. I hope you understand the purpose of the rule. Right? And remember the 4 things that I have asked you to remember. It's Heydon's rule, know the background, suppress the mischief, advance the remedy. That's it. Entire rule is over. Right? And since we do not have any case study based question asked on this, so I have no questions to share. Right? You had direct question. I have given you all the interpretation of this statute, of this rule. Right? You can frame your answer accordingly, use those 4 keywords, and then your answer is done. Okay with it? I hope the class was helpful. So in the next class, we'll come up with the next rule, that is the rule of exceptional construction. And there are a few more rules. They go on shorter and shorter. Big rules are almost done. right? And we'll be able to wind up the class soon. Soon means I won't define the number of lectures, but yeah, it will be soon, right? Maybe the number of lectures we had, that is the more number of lectures we will be having. Maybe we have already been to the middle, or maybe there's one extra lecture that we would need. So we'll see as we commence ahead with it, right? But all you need to do is, please, when you are free, right, because these videos are available with you all the time on the go, whenever you are free, just log on, watch these videos. If you're traveling, if you're doing anything, these videos are helpful for you over there. For people in the internship in the metros, right, they spend a lot of time traveling to and fro your office and from your internship. I used to do a lot, right? I used to stay in Delhi and I used to travel to Gurgaon. So when there was traffic, the cab would stuck for 2 hours, right? But nevertheless, I never reached home before 1.5 hours, right? So that is the time that goes waste. 1.5 hour in the morning, 1.5 hour in the evening, 3 hours, right? In 3 hours, you can complete more than 5-6 videos over here. Right? So that is why the purpose of giving you these classes over here is that you can have it available on the go, right? So please make use of that time. Keep it inside your head. That is why we are not going very technical on these aspects, because I know if I go technical and 1 hour of technical bashing on your head, right, half of the things will be away during the day. That is why I take you slowly through the stories, narrating everything, focusing on each and every aspect in detail, so that even if you miss out half of them, the half will be enough for you to remember and go ahead in your examination with that, right? If there are any more suggestions that you want to bring on, please use the comment box below. I'll be very free to take it up and discuss with you upon that, right? So please stay tuned for the next lecture. Until then, this is Abhinay Gupta signing off. It's good to be with you people. Thank you and bye-bye.